Kim Leadbeater. Now, I don't know if either of you have got opinions on this, on the assisted dying bill, but Kim Leadbeater, the sister of the murdered MP Joe Cox, a Labour MP, and a proponent of the assisted dying bill. Now, she has received some pretty fierce criticism over recent days, as she's promised everyone in Parliament, look, if you vote for this assisted dying bill, I promise you that there will be a High Court judge that signs off on each of these decisions to terminate someone's life. And you've even seen Labour MPs argue that it's discriminatory if we pass this legislation without allowing prisoners to do it. Well, prisoners have a right to healthcare, but they don't have a right to terminate their own lives. Otherwise, what's the penalty? If you're doing a full term, you might want to kill yourself. So they've been on quite the red herring recently. But here's what she actually argued, that in Right to Life put together this example of her promising a High Court judge to safeguard this legislation.
There is a perception around the slippery slope concept which actually isn't reality, and it would have to be signed off by a High Court judge. A High Court judge is involved in the process. We're involving a High Court judge in the process. There will be a High Court judge, and that wouldn't just be a tick box exercise. The judge would speak to the doctors, be reassured that all the process had been followed.
And a judge to check that you are not being exploited.
It would have to go to a High Court judge.
Go to a High Court judge to make...
Judge, you've got the High Court judge.
High Court judge. Does a High Court judge would have to rule each time a person makes a request.
Sign off by a High Court judge.
High Court judge.
To a High Court judge to make...
Judge, you've got to approve it.
Then it has to go to a High Court judge. So all of this will be tested.
I would have checks and balances, and then it would have to go to a High Court judge to add an extra layer of safeguarding. It will be the most robust piece of legislation in the world. There is a perception around the slippery slope concept which actually isn't reality. There is a...
Well, it is now, my love. And she argued on the BBC, she said some oversight is better than none. Well, when it comes to, allowing granny or a terminally ill person to go off and be murdered by a doctor, I'm not sure that actually you can have just a tinsy-wincy bit of safeguarding. They're going to put together a panel. Who knows what the hell this panel's going to consist of? I just think if you sell someone a lie like that, then you're on pretty icy ground. If you tell people, vote for this legislation, and then we can scrutinise it and make sure that the safeguards are robust, only to then get rid of the safeguards. Even if I don't know either of your opinions, to be honest, but even if you are both advocates of the legislation, I think you could surely admit that right now, the safeguards are not the promised safeguards from a month ago, Connie, I'll start with you this time.
Well, yeah, it's quite an embarrassing U-turn on that aspect. I mean, I've always, in principle, been in favour of assisted dying, and I find it very sad that family members risk being prosecuted themselves by helping their own family members who obviously truly do want to end their own life if they're taking the time and going through that whole process of going to Dignitas, for example. But the more that I have listened to the debate, it's made me far more aware of the fact that, yes, when you get to an age where you're potentially not wanting to live anymore, the chances are your ability to consent might have been reduced. And so it is quite I mean, yeah, at the present state, I do not think this legislation is something that should be supported, even though in principle, I have always been in favour of the idea that someone should be able to legally end life. I mean, the one thing that is ridiculous about this whole thing is that at the moment, it's obviously suicide is not illegal anymore, but it's still illegal to help someone to commit suicide. So it's like, if we're going to make it illegal to help someone commit suicide, then it's strange that the action itself isn't illegal. So it's illegal to help someone commit a legal act. I think that's that's where the law is extremely confusing. And so I think there does need to be reform, and I think people should have the option. But of course,
Reform,
there should
choice
be,
words.
and of course there should be safeguarding and very careful oversight of these things. I'm not personally against it entirely as a
Yeah. I
as a
thought that might be
concept.
the case. Younger people that tends to be their view. I am against it. And it's not on. I do hold faith, but it's not on a faith-based argument. It's just on the argument that I think that the slippery slope and that the abuse of the legislation, I think, will happen. And the judicial activism within the sphere as well to expand the legislation further, that happened pretty quickly in Canada, for example. So I'm deeply concerned that you're going to see people with anorexia, for example, being able to terminate their lives because they say that it's a terminal, a completely life-changing illness that will be with you till the end of days. Well, I don't ever remember being told that having anorexia, although the actual impacts of starving yourself could kill you, that actually it's classed as a terminal illness. I think that's a redefinition of the illness itself, Chloe.
Yeah, I mean, that is just crazy to extend it to people with anorexia. And with so many different debates, I've done debating in school, and it seems like almost every single motion we debated, there was some way that you could apply the slippery slope argument. But, if you applied the slippery slope argument to anything, then no changes, no legislation would ever be made if you always thought that the worst case scenario was going to come true. It's always very difficult to recognize when a slippery slope is actually going to come to fruition. And the good thing in this situation is that we are not the first country considering this. There are other countries that have brought in assisted dying, so we can look to them to see, will we actually go down a slippery slope if we bring this kind of thing in? A bit of a mixed bag on this. In some countries, yes. In some countries, no. There are very strict safeguards in place, very strict conditions as to when this can be used. It's not something that's used super often. But the cases that you point out in Canada do give me reason to worry. And given that our healthcare situation is such a mess at the moment,
Exactly.
I don't think that it is a good idea.
Because palliative care, end-of-life care doesn't exist in this country. Basically, it's so bad.
Well, this is the thing, is at a time when the NHS is on its knees and they are desperate to do anything to save money, then I worry that this would be abused. So I think that it is the wrong time. I think that we can potentially, if we manage to sort our NHS out, I pray that we do at some point, so that when I get to old age, it is actually possible to get an ambulance if you're dying. That we can have a debate about it in the future, but I don't think that now is the time. This specific debate about whether the High Court should be involved or not, I imagine what has happened here is that Labour decided for themselves that, the High Court is going to have to sign off on all of this. I expect that the courts have now gone to Labour and said, are you out of your mind? We are up to our eyebrows with cases. We've got so many people on long waiting lists to see the courts for other things at the moment. We have absolutely no way in hell that we can deal with every old person that wants to end their life as well. It's not going to happen. I expect that that's why this decision has been made. So it may not pass at the next stage. And there were, I think, a lot of MPs who voted for this, who were not 100% in favour of this, because they wanted to see all the different conditions that would be placed, all the safeguards at the final stage. They wanted to see what amendments would be made and what not. So, I mean, Lee Anderson, for example, was chatting to him the other day. He said he voted for it last time, but he thinks he'll probably vote against it this time because now he's unsure about it. So I think you'll probably see quite a lot of people switch, and it may not pass.
That's interesting. That is interesting, actually. Karen says, well, Swipe actually has a funny one. After 5 years of Labour, I can imagine the queues for assisted dying would be pretty big. Karen says, I'm on the fence of assisted dying. There would have to be so many safeguards. I understand each side, but I'm not sure. And of course, Karen, those safeguards have already been thrown out the window. And Pom says, save NHS money, reduce pensions, assisted dying bill, what can go wrong? I'm afraid that actually I think some people do have that view. And after we saw Andrew Gwynn, the Minister for Labour, be dismissed after he was exposed for talking about how he wishes one of his pensioner constituents would pop her clogs, that this is a view shared by some on the political left. And Michael says, in Canada, the homeless were pushed towards it. And Pom says, the Canada version went well, not. And then Kearse says, I would like to have that choice, but the system could be open to abuse. And Victoria, there are already assisted dying measures in place. This is seeking to broaden the net. And Kearse says again, I don't trust anything under Starmer's government. Elliott, you're far too young to die, thanks be to God. But where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I share the same view as Connie, actually. Like, well, it could be, I think, abused. And I see a comment in the chat there from Michael Hancock saying they'll view anybody who's unemployed or old as surplus. That is a bit extreme, but I think, I mean, look, in the world we live in, I don't know what is extreme anymore. No. We've seen with immigration, that's been sort of abused. Even the benefit system, you can get benefits for anything now. So yeah, I do think that this can be abused, and especially when it's actually someone's life directly that's been impacted by it. I think it's better to stay on the safe side, and for me personally, I would be totally against it for that reason.
Yeah. Well, we've got a mixed bag here tonight. That's good. I like that. That's a bit of diversity. Can I co-opt the language of the left?
This show is DEI on steroids.
Yeah,
How
it
could we
is. It
possibly
is.
be considered anti-woke?